We're living in the silent depression.
We are in a silent depression. When you compare the Great Depression to today, this is going to absolutely blow your mind.
Hi, I'm Brett House, and I'm an economics professor here at Columbia Business School. Today, I'm going to be looking at TikTok and its discussion about the possibility of a silent depression creeping into the US economy. So macroeconomists use a number of words to talk about upturns and downturns in the economy. You're probably familiar with the idea of a recession, which typically refers to 2 or more quarters of economic contraction, when growth has been negative in the production of goods and services. Depressions, like the Great Depression in the 1930s, are simply more elongated recessions. Recently on TikTok, there's been a lot of discussion about the idea of a silent depression, a period when growth has gone down, when well-being has gotten worse for a big slice of the population, but we haven't been talking about it.
So if you look back to the Great Depression, the house was only 3 times the average salary. Now it is 8 times the average salary. The car was 46% of the salary. The car today is 85% of the salary. And here's the craziest part. The rent was 16% of the average salary. It is now 42% of the average salary.
So, the American economy isn't in a silent depression. It's not even in a depression at all. When we came into the beginning of 2023, many economists thought that we might slide into a recession over the course of the year, but growth in goods and services and in trade have all remained far stronger than we anticipated. And as a result, the American economy skated by a recession, and we saw real wages over the last 3 quarters increase for the first time in a few years. That said, the American economy isn't working for everyone, and some TikTokers are pointing out that as a share of average income, the cost of buying a car, rent, or buying a house are all much larger than they were in the 1930s. That's a simple, but it's ultimately an unsatisfying comparison, because that car that you can buy now is far more sophisticated than the one you could buy in the 1930s. The house that you can buy now, on average, is going to be nearly twice the size that it was in the 1930s comparison, and the rent that you're paying is probably for a much better and larger apartment in a better city. So, making a simple comparison with the 1930s is useful because it gives us a sense of how the cost of living has evolved against average income, but we need to adjust it for the quality of what those costs deliver for the average American.
Did the boomer generation have better spending habits than the millennials do today? This is really just apples to oranges. So we need to continue to share these stats so we can change the societal narrative of what's going on to the middle class. And then we also need to take some personal responsibility and pay off the debt.
So comparisons between generations are always difficult because they're never straightforward. They always have complications that don't satisfy a single narrative. On some fronts, millennials and Gen Z members of the United States population have it much better than people in preceding generations. They're materially wealthier, they are more educated, they often have bigger opportunities across socioeconomic classes, and they have access to more of the world and more opportunities outside the United States than any of their predecessors did. On the other hand, there's no question they're entering life as an adult saddled with more debt than preceding generations. It takes them longer to move out of home and set up their own households. And that's in part because affording a home is harder in many of America's major cities than it was 30 or 40 years ago.
We currently are making less than the height of the Great Depression. How could we be living through worse cost of living and wages than 1930? And no politician, no media outlet, no one is talking about it.
Well, it's true that goods and services for most Americans have gotten more expensive, but over the last 8 months, we've seen average wages gain against prices at a higher rate than the cost of living has increased. And so real wages are actually going up, and those gains are the first that we've seen for workers in a few years. If we look though across multiple decades, we would see that on average, workers have more or less just kept up with the pace of the cost of living. There haven't been substantial gains in real wages in many cases and many parts of the economy, but we have seen improvements in the goods and services that those wages are able to buy. And as a result, the quality or the standard of living for Americans has improved over the last 50 years. There's no question that as we've been through so much volatility over the last few years in the American economy, that many folks are hurting. As we discussed, it's only in the last few quarters that wages have started growing faster than the cost of living. And the TikTok identification of the silent depression is picking up on that underlying trend and set of feelings amongst Americans. But if you're looking to TikTok for your economic news, bring a little skepticism and nuance to the viewing experience, because understanding economic data and your own experience in it requires a little more context.